I'm Anita Finley, and I'm your host of the ZOOMERTIMES TV. And I have a great guest. We have the best guest. I feel so fortunate. And you have heard him before. And hopefully you've read his book. This is a wonderful, wonderful, well, he's the environmentalist of the highest repute. And I have to tell you, so his name is Richard W. Emory, Jr. And he wrote a book called Fighting Pollution and Climate Change, an EPA Veteran's Guide, How to Join in Saving Our Life on Planet Earth. So that's a very, very big responsibility, but he put his time and effort into this book. Fantastic book. If you are someone that's concerned about the pollution, you will want to buy this book. And that's what it's called. So it's Fighting Pollution and Climate Change. And Richard W. Emory Jr. is the author. Are you now retired, Richard?
Well, Anita, I am retired, but I'd much rather be young and working. And I'm continuing to talk about this with nice people like you and do whatever I can because I'm still concerned. But, you know, once you're retired, you need a sense of mission in life. You need some reason to keep going. And
no, I
this
didn't
is my
mean that
reason.
you're right. You're going to keep going. I just meant that you're retired from the government where you worked.
Oh, yes, I retired in 2011, and but I still want to keep pushing ahead to help save the world.
Right. Well, now you wrote the book. That took a long time to write this book. It was filled with just so much information that only someone like you would know. And you did write that you had to clear everything because you were in a top position there and you knew a lot of things. But you certainly have a lot now that people need you. They need to hear from you, especially now.
Well, with California and the West Coast burning up and the hurricanes just keep coming, we seem to have a break this week, but who knows what'll happen next week.
Right.
And just the ordinary sunny day sea level rise that you see in Florida, and it's been quite bad up and down the entire East Coast this past week with a hurricane that was as far out as Bermuda, causing a lot of onshore flooding on the entire East Coast, just with a hurricane 1,000 miles away. It's quite amazing.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that. I live in Boynton Beach, as you know. You live in Boynton Beach. I live over on the Intracoastal and right near two Georges, and the one street was impassable. The water was so high. Now they attributed that to something to do with the moon. I don't know what they said it was, but I don't understand it. I mean, we didn't have a hurricane and that happened. What caused that? Sorry.
Well, okay. Well, let's see. Twice a year, the moon, the sun, and the earth align in a row, a straight line, and you get what's called a king tide. And it's because they're all aligned in a straight line, and so it amplifies the pull of the tidal waters up and down, and it also depends on how the apogee or the perigee, you know, how close the moon is to the earth, and yes, and it's a king tide.
Yeah,
but
so smart.
But it's coming on top of sea level rise. The sea
Right.
the sea has been rising slowly too, not so much yet, but then if you have an onshore wind, you know, even from a hurricane 1,000 miles away, the onshore wind will pile up the water if it blows for days and days, and sometimes you get all those things occurring together, and it's a sunny day, but look at the tide.
Right. Well, I saved up a question for you. I knew you were coming on, and I read your book, and I was so impressed. But if you were put into a powerful position right now, a position where you were the czar of the pollution and what's happened, the climate change, what would you do? I know this will probably take 5 hours or 2 days, but what would you do?
Well, thank you for that question. That's a very open-ended question. I'll give you just 3 or 4 things in a list, and then we can talk about whichever ones you want to talk about. First of all, I would take a long look at nuclear power, the advanced nuclear power, which is not like what we've commercialized, but the new modern fourth generation advanced nuclear power. It's called thorium reactors, advanced integral fast reactors. Uh, a lot of very smart people are interested in it now because they're needed to carry the baseload electricity demand when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow. So I would look at that. I would stop with the natural gas, which is methane. And methane on a short-term basis, one molecule is 100 times worse than CO2 from burning coal. And we've just let this methane go out of control. And it's natural gas utilization, because some of its leaks before it's burned, is changing the climate faster than even burning coal. So I think we've got to get off of the natural gas. I think we have to remember all EPA's many successes, and I could tell you what they were. And I think we have to move to new market-based measures that incentivize industry to bring on the replacements very quickly, which once industry is properly incentivized and has a profit motive, they will very quickly get us off the fossil fuels and onto these wonderful new technologies that are already existing. I was a prosecutor and what's called a command and control guy. So I'm an environmental enforcement lawyer, and a lot of the rules I dealt with were basically, they all said the same thing. They said, do it, maybe not tomorrow, we'll give you a year, but do it within a year or else, or else it's an offense, you know. But these new market-based measures are much more flexible. Businesses can comply in a way that's better for them, and they like market-based measures like cap and trade. And the other one I could talk about is called carbon fee and dividend.
And what has happened to solar power? I know we have we have the wind power now, we have all the windmills, but what's happened to solar power? I thought that was going to be a big deal.
Well, the nice thing about solar power, particularly in Florida, is it comes online right in the middle of the day when the peak load electricity demand is the greatest. And it really helps the utilities because they don't have to build these expensive plants to only run for a few hours a day, you know. It's very, very advantageous for the peak load. But of course, unless you have batteries, it's not going to run after the sun goes down. And we always have to think about what can carry the base load. And really only nuclear has the capacity. I mean, there are other forms of power like geothermal and hydropower, but only nuclear has the capacity to carry the entire baseload of civilization everywhere when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow. And so that's why we have to talk about that.
Yeah, I remember in our last talk, or I know in your book also, we talked about nuclear power, and there are the two opinions. One that thinks it's highly dangerous, and then your discussion of it, where you say it isn't, and it is so beneficial compared to some of the other things you described.
Yeah. Well, let me say this. Jane Fonda's movie, The China Syndrome, came out just before 3 Mile Island in Pennsylvania, right near where I live in Harrisburg, had a problem. But nobody was killed or even injured by radiation there. Fukushima was not a nuclear power disaster. It was a flooding event, and I don't think that radiation killed anybody there. Thousands of people were killed by the flood and running away from the flood, and more people were killed when Japan shut down all its nuclear power plants and reverted to coal. So they probably killed 10 or 20,000 people from ordinary air pollution since Fukushima. So nobody died from those incidents. Now Chernobyl killed, nobody really knows, maybe a few hundred people. But the truth of the matter is, right now around the world, probably I've heard 5 million, I've heard 7 million people around the world a year die from coal burning, from ordinary air pollution. So it's safe to say that for every one person who may have been killed by a nuclear power plant, coal and fossil fuels have killed 1 million people, and nuclear power already is the safest form there is. Now, that's with the commercialized early, I call them primitive, but well, that's just my unpleasant name for them. But they're known as light water reactors that were commercialized starting 50 years ago. The modern reactors, the advanced reactors, have 3 benefits. One, they cannot be used to make nuclear weapons. They're proliferation resistant. Number two, they cannot melt down like some of the original ones can and release radioactivity. None of these, not even the original ones, can explode like a bomb, so that's a myth. But the third advantage of the advanced light water reactors is they will use as fuel, free fuel, all the waste that's stored around in pools sitting around the existing commercialized reactors. All the waste they don't really know what to do with. Our silly federal government keeps trying to bury it in Yucca Mountain, but that's a waste. It's fuel. It's free fuel for the advanced nuclear reactors. Now, whether we want advanced nuclear reactors or not in this country, and I think we do, and Bill Gates and a lot of other smart people are investing in them, the Chinese, the Russians, and the South Koreans will be making them, and they'll be selling them. They'll be making them in shipyards as small modular reactors, SMRs. Sounds like a Girl Scout cookie is some more when I say that, but a small modular reactor,
Right.
and they'll be the size of big refrigerators. They'll ship them out to the waiting world, and you just buy, how many do you need? 2, 10, line them up in a row, plug them in, and there they are. So it doesn't really matter what we think in this country. We're so backward in so many ways. The Chinese will be selling them to us just like they did the flat screens and the iPhones and some of and our solar. They've taken our solar technology too, because we don't really have a homegrown manufacturing plant anymore. So it's all coming.
Listening to you, it must be very difficult for you to sit and watch the news and see what's going on, especially now with the fires. And I'd like to talk about those fires. Here I am. I'm just a part of the population. I don't know 0% of what you know about the pollution and the climate change. I just see what happens. But I was wondering your stress level. When you see these things going on, you must feel so powerless.
Actually, I've kind of reached a state of happy, chirpy delight in seeing the young people pick up where my generation has
Good.
failed.
Yeah.
And I really feel that too many of my generation have just been asleep. They've been greedy. They've been willfully ignorant and look the other way, even though it's been right there before them. I have a new. He's not new, but I've sort of rediscovered the sayings of Yogi Berra, who was a humorist. I call him a great American philosopher. But he said, you could learn a lot by just watching.
Right.
It's one thing he said. And he also said, the future isn't what it used to be. And these things are all so true. And he also said, and this is true of my generation, if you don't know where you're going, you're going to end up somewhere else. These are all sayings of Yogi Berra. But young people know. They're watching. They know where they're going, and they get it. And so I'm quite hopeful and cheered on and energized by the youth, and absolutely appalled at my own generation's behavior.
Yeah, well, this book, I'm going to hold it up again, Fighting Pollution and Climate Change. It's an excellent book to get a very good education. Richard W. Emory Jr. And in order to get this book, would they go on Amazon, Richard? Is that the easiest way to get it?
Yeah, you can just Google it. It's popping up everywhere nicely
now. It does
now.
pop up.
But the best way to get into this is to go to my website, and it's very simple. It's Fighting Pollution Book. So it's www.fightingpollutionbook, all one word, .com. And there you can see something about me and something about the book. You can see the reviews the book's been getting, which are really great, I'm happy to say. And there are also hot links to Amazon, to Barnes& and Noble. There's a hot link to BookLocker, which is the publisher. And if you don't have Amazon Prime, it's cheaper to buy it from the publisher. Uh, it's all there, and I think that's a great place to start. www.fightingpollutionbook.com.
Well, let me just say that we thought so much of it. We made it our book of the month in August in Boomer Times. There's a review. You can get on our website and really read the review. We put him on the cover with his book because, you know, we do try to reach those boomers and seniors and make them realize that there still is time, that they have power. And it's up to them to, you know, whether it's their children or what. But when I'd like to talk a little bit about the fires, because I really don't understand about the fires. I know they've happened many, many years, but what could we do? And what's causing all those fires, Richard?
Well, it's not just in California and the West Coast, it's also in Australia. And the drought has taken over Syria. And one reason all those Syrian refugees began pouring into closer to the Mediterranean, and we had so much trouble in the Middle East, was because they were driven off their farms by the drought. Iraq is supposedly going to be almost uninhabitable with the heat in a few years. So it's this belt of well, also sub-Saharan Africa. You know, we see the people there suffering, and they come up to Libya and try to cross into Europe to have a life. And the drought zone is expanding in many places. It's not just California, but California is our part of it. So I'm not a climatologist. I can't tell you exactly why, but it's very clear what's happening. And you might say, well, this is maybe being too cute, but I like to say that it's baked in. And what I mean by that is it's really too late to reverse so much of this, because there's so much carbon in the air already, and there's more going into the sea. Actually, that's a good thing. 92% of the carbon that we pump into the air when we burn fossil fuels goes into the sea. The sea is much more dense and can hold more. This is a really good thing, because if it weren't for that, the average global temperature, if all the carbon stayed in the air that we had put into it, the average global temperature today would be 125 degrees, and we'd all be dying like flies. So it's really a good thing that it's going into the sea. The problem with that is twofold. Well, it's manyfold, but one problem is seawater with a few more degrees of temperature is like rocket fuel for hurricanes, and just a slightly warmer seawater, boom, hurricanes really take off. The second thing is we're killing the coral, and the coral. I don't think our grandchildren or great grandchildren will ever be able to snorkel and see the beautiful coral reefs and the fish like we did, because it's said that maybe within 20 years we will complete the destruction. Will be humanity's first complete destruction of a global ecosystem. Will be the coral reefs, first to go. You might say they're the canary in the coal mine. It's better them than us, and that's about the only thing good I can say about it.
Well, I'm glad you touched on the water. We've never really explored the oceans in a sense. There's some exploration, but what do you think that, you know, and I know you're very smart in so many areas, maybe this is unfair, but what's your opinion about the oceans? Can we look to them for some relief of something?
The oceans are oh, that's such a great question.
I know.
Oceans are
I'd only ask you. I couldn't ask anyone else.
well, I'm not an oceanographer. All right.
I know
So
you're not.
I really have dealt with mostly land-based pollution. Now, it's true that almost everything we do on land eventually goes to the sea. So it's one reason I focused on the land. And I told you about the corals,
Yes.
but I really don't have any great hope for the oceans. I mean, the oceans are so full of plastic. They say very soon there'll be a greater weight of plastics in the sea than there will be fish in the sea. In just a few years, so many fisheries have been fished to commercial extinction. The fish, they're still maybe straggling, surviving. I'm not saying total extinction, but they can't be harvested anymore because they don't swim in schools anymore. They're not plentiful enough. And there's going to be more plastic in the sea than fish. Uh, and the ultimate problem with the sea is it's the subject of a book by Peter D. Ward, and it's called Under a Green Sky, Global Warming, the Mass Extinctions of the Past, and what they can tell us about our future. And his book, it's pretty heavy science, but it's based on the geologic record of climate change. And he shows that once the CO2, the carbon dioxide in the air, reaches about 1,000 parts per million, we're now at 417. And remember, most of that goes into the sea. The sea has much more CO2 in it. In past extinctions, what has happened is the sea has become anoxic, that is, meaning without oxygen, and has emitted a poisonous green gas called hydrogen sulfide. And we know it as swamp gas. But in 4 of the 5 past extinctions, when the sky turns green, the air is then toxic and life on land is over. Now, if we continue with business as usual, putting carbon into the air, which then goes into the sea, we will be there in about 200 years. And that is why human extinction is really right in coming into sight now for our great-great-great-grandchildren, unless we change our behavior. I think our grandchildren and great-grandchildren will change their behavior because once they're wading in the sea level, which is going to rise sooner, they will realize that it's time to go to renewable, clean energy, climate-friendly energy, and stop with the fossil fuels. So I'm not predicting human extinction, but the hydrogen sulfide coming from the sea will kill us in about 200 years if we continue our behavior.
And do you think it's too late to start working on getting it reversed?
No, we have to. No, it's not too late. And I think our grandchildren and great-grandchildren will stop it. And who knows, we may start stopping it next year if we have a Green New Deal that has teeth in it.
Yeah.
And we'll see. So I'm very hopeful. I mean, you have to be hopeful.
Yeah, you spent your whole life doing this, and we talked about this in the last interview and why you even started this growing up in New England, and that was interesting. And maybe people who haven't heard that, and that's part of your book, which was so nice at the very beginning. I think that would be a good thing to kind of run over that a little bit again. If you're a little kid here and you're in the Cape, right? Is that where it was? I forget now.
I lived in Maine, and
Yeah.
I was very fortunate to be a grandchild in my grandmother's house in the summertime, and I grew up there on a beautiful harbor, and it was quite distressing to me when I was 6 years old to see that. I'm just trying to find the portion in the book here.
That was towards the beginning, I thought.
At the beginning. Why don't I read the first paragraph with my Maine accent? But just for authenticity and fun, I'll read it with my Maine accent from 75 years ago. Okay?
Go ahead.
Okay, here we go. Now, you usually start a book when there's a dark and stormy night, So I tried to achieve that too. Here we go. This is from the state of Maine from 1949. At the sounding of the horn, some women, permanent residents of our little town, grabbed their sharpest knives and rushed out their front doors. In the street, they were joined by hungry cats and excited children like me, 8 years old, and attracted to the commotion. We all rushed down the road to the harbor to see coming in from the sea the sardine transport boat arriving at what we called the fish factory. Being halfway down east in Hancock County, Maine, these town women anticipated a rare payday. The year was 1949. So, and then I
Thank you.
tell,
You know, we only have 2 minutes left, but I'm glad you did that. I think you ought to consider getting into some acting classes. You're very good, and I really appreciate your doing that. And you things, whether I talk to a doctor or talk to anybody, usually when they're very young like you, something happens in their brain, and that's how they kind of get started with their ideas. But you have risen to heights there that most people, I don't know anyone like you who've done this, who've been in the government, you've been a prosecutor, you've been terrific, and here you wrote this incredible book, and I'm sure there's more to come from you. So, Richard, I really appreciate
thank
your
you.
coming on our show again, really.
Well, I enjoyed it. I'll just say that the next year, when I was 10 years old, the sardines didn't come. And that's what caused me to wonder what had happened, you see. And
Right.
that plus the beauty of the Maine coast turned me into a greenie,
Yeah.
which is what I am. So.
Yeah, well, you were lucky, and you don't have that accent now, but you're a terrific guy, and I'm really glad that you did that. That was really cute, and thank you so much, and I'm sure that we'll be back with you again. Thank you for coming on today.
God bless you, and let's go out and save the world.